Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here. We are continuing our previews of SEC football schedules for 2022. Today, we arrive at the team closest to us, as you can probably tell by our shirts, at least closest in proximity. That's Vanderbilt. And Blake, it's just been a rough few years for the Commodores, who enter 2022 on a 21-game SEC losing skid. And my goodness, when you look at that SEC schedule, hard to find wins on it, but maybe some relief in the pre-conference portion.
Yeah, that's probably what you're looking at here, and I think that's at least something where we've talked about it before with these schedules. I think it's better just to have that, especially if you're a Vanderbilt, play all your non-conference games up front. I know you would probably have a different opinion of saying, well, maybe you just have one late in the season to kind of break things up. But to be honest with you, I don't know if there's that much of a difference just because maybe by winning some of these early games, it gives you some momentum and that kind of stuff. And obviously you've still got your bye built in there, but I mean, your bye is built in after your first SEC game. So you know what you're getting each season with the conference slate. And I don't know if there's a lot of ways to navigate that. What is it? I think they have a bye between Alabama and Ole Miss, and they've got a week off between Missouri and South Carolina. I think that's right because
Yeah, they're the only
they're
SEC team that's got two byes because of that week
because of the
zero game
Hawaii
at
game.
Hawaii.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of so I think in a sense that makes it a little bit. I don't know. I'm not going to call it easy. It's not easy at all, but it makes it better. I think just how that sets up. So maybe having that Hawaii game, is a nice thing to have just from that sense. But still, once you get beyond, I think these first four games, you kind of know what to expect in terms of you're going to be reaching to find wins, and it's just a matter of can you find a way to knock off a couple people maybe in the SEC? So.
Well, the good news for Vanderbilt, and of course we would have said this last year too, is they'll be favored in the opener. I think Vanderbilt about a 6-point favorite at Hawaii, which is in about as big of a mess maybe as the Commodores were in last year. So I would think that maybe you see Hawaii go through the same thing that Vanderbilt did. That's just a brutal season. And, starting off when you're replacing quarterbacks and coaches and all sorts of things, that's a game that is very winnable for Vanderbilt. I'm seeing Vanderbilt right around the late 90s in most of the power polls and rankings of the 131 Division I teams. Hawaii checking in right around 120. So again, this game, according to odds makers and the people who do the power polls and the computers that do them, this is a game that Vanderbilt should win. It will not be a hostile environment. I think capacity in Hawaii right now, because the Aloha Stadium has been condemned, around 10,000, maybe a little bit less. So this will not be exactly a hostile environment for Vanderbilt in game one, I don't think.
Yeah, Vanderbilt and game one openers over the years, there's a you try to be optimistic, but boy, we've seen some as well over the years where you come in and you think you're in really good shape, and what was it? Well, I mean, there's been several, but I think I'm specifically thinking of the Temple game.
The Temple game of Derek Mason's debut was a disaster, and last year Clark Lea's was too.
Yeah, so I think it's those kind of things. If it's in Nashville, I'd probably, even though those were I think as well, but yeah. So I always have that in the back of my mind. I think just watching this team over the years, of course. So yeah, they should. I think they're the better team on paper, and again, that's where that's so important because if you can win that game, look, you come back home, you feel like you should beat Elon. 2-0, feeling good going into a challenging game. I think it's Wake Forest. Then you got to go on the road to Northern Illinois, which, again, it's one of those where it's like you kind of look at the way it sets up, and so it's an interesting first four games. But obviously, that first one in Hawaii, I think to me that's everything because it's like you said, if you come out, you're the favorite, you win that game, you at least exhale a little bit, moving into that next part of your schedule. But it's like if you lose that first game, man, you really look ahead, and that's where you're really saying where are the wins after that. So,
well, nothing is a slam dunk win for Vanderbilt. We learned that a year ago. But week 2 against Elon, that's a team that I think went 6-5 a year ago. We got one vote in the preseason FCS top 25. Vanderbilt, according to Jeff Sagarin, if the teams had played a year ago in Nashville, would have been about 11-point favorite. So the silver lining is if you're Vanderbilt, you've got a shot to go 2-0 off the bat because they're going to be favored in both those games.
Yeah, and I think that's all you can ask for, right? I mean, I really look at it that way. Like that's all you can ask for when you look kind of the way the schedule. Because I think we've seen sometimes too. And again, I'm trying to remember all this off my head. I even you brought up the ETSU game last year as the opener. I was like, I forgot that was the opener. But there have been situations, right, where that second game for Vanderbilt, I think in some years has been that SEC game. And I think that's where kind of just splitting your schedule. I feel like this is just a better situation where knowing that you do come back home, you're playing in Nashville against a team you feel like you should beat, and like I said, you maybe are setting yourself up for a nice opportunity to be 2-0 here. Before you get into a stretch of games where I don't know the rest of them. I think it's the what if, right? I mean, there's going to be most of the games they'll play the rest of the way. They're not going to be the favorite in. I would say what all, but I mean, really, I think we're just looking at the Northern Illinois game. Unless you think they'll be favored at home against Wake Forest,
No, they
I
will
don't think
not.
so. So,
Wake is
um,
about a top 35 team
yeah,
by what I've been looking at, and I'm
yeah,
I'm guessing
that's
that Vanderbilt enters that one even in its own stadium.
yeah.
I don't know, Blake, what probably a 10 to 14 point underdog,
I was
depending
gonna
on how the
say,
teams
yeah,
look out of the
I was gonna
gate.
say 8 to 10, but I think it could be more than that, depending on like you said, depending on the first two games. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Well, I think that's a key game for Vanderbilt. Obviously, if it can get an upset, that would be huge. That's going to be an 11 o'clock kick in Nashville, so it will be roasting that day. But the one the next week may be sort of the swing game for Vanderbilt in the season where there aren't a lot of them. Northern Illinois would be their chance to get a road win. Northern Illinois is probably going to be favored. NIU coming in around 90th in the polls that I'm looking at, and it is the defending MAC champion. So Thomas Hammock's team knows how to win a little bit. That will not be a hostile environment that Vanderbilt will be playing in. I've been in that building. In fact, I was there a year ago for a game about that time. And so that's one where Vanderbilt can get the win and say at that point go to 3-1. I don't know that there's much left on the schedule after that, which we're about to get to. But at least as a Vanderbilt fan, where you've not had much to cheer for recently, that fan base is going to feel a lot better if Vanderbilt can get an upset. And that's a game where I think, goodness, Blake, maybe a 6-point favorite or less either way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's a low spread just
Yeah.
because, and like we said too, all that's going to be dependent on how the first three games go. If they come in 1-2, having lost to Hawaii and Wake Forest, then obviously that number I think gets a little smaller. If they beat Hawaii, beat Elon, play well against Wake Forest, let's say they lose, then I think you're kind of like, all right, well, you feel maybe a little bit more confident. That's why you said it. I mean, that's a swing game because you're talking about potentially the difference in, depending on how the season's gone to that point, you're talking about 3-1 versus 2-2 or 1-3. And like you said, for a team that, as we mentioned from the top, is going to be searching for wins to try to even get into the bowl conversation, you have to get as many of these
Yeah.
first four as you can get. And that's why, yeah, I mean, I don't, and I know a lot of people like, I don't anticipate 0-4 or anything like that. But like, if you're 1-3, then I think you want to talk about frustrated at
Yeah.
that point because I mean, again, you're not going to be favored in any other game you play the rest of the season
Yeah.
after that. So I think it's such, and I know for like, if you're a fan of another team that's top 25 team and all this, you're probably looking at this and thinking, man, I'd love if we had the schedule, but it's like for Vanderbilt, these are that line, as we know, is so thin. The margin of error is right now just it's so
The
small,
drop, the
and
drop. Well, look, we're having a different conversation because the drop off from the rest of
yeah,
the SEC, even at Missouri, which is probably 13 to Vanderbilt, is pretty
yeah,
substantial. So this is sort of a special conversation.
yeah,
Alabama, September the 24th in Tuscaloosa. It does not matter if that's Tuscaloosa or the Moon. I think we know how that's going to turn out. The good news for Vanderbilt is there's a break the week after that,
yeah,
which it's probably going to need to reassemble some confidence after that. Then a game with Ole Miss and Nashville. Again, I think Ole Miss will have the advantage in the stands. Ole Miss will be with Jackson Dart, hopefully healthy and getting comfortable under center in the new scheme. Ole Miss is a top 20 team by most people that I'm looking at. Then a road trip to another national title contender in Georgia. Again, I think not a lot of use in discussing that one because we know how that's going to go. I mean, Alabama and Georgia are both going to be 30-point plus lines, I would think.
Yeah.
And then Missouri. That maybe if you're looking for a swing game for Vanderbilt, I think that's the one. Vanderbilt got Missouri a couple years ago at home, played Missouri pretty tough last year. I think if you're Vanderbilt, your best chance for an SEC win comes October the 22nd in Columbia.
Yeah, I think so. Because, and you've talked about it. I mean, those have been interesting games over the years with those two, and you talk about kind of last year and all that. And man, it's again for a team that we know is fighting from the bottom. Having at Alabama and at Georgia on your schedule is just. But I mean, I guess in a sense, it's like, is there a difference between playing them in Tuscaloosa or playing them
No.
in Nashville? That's the thing is like those two games could be anywhere, and it really wouldn't matter. Honestly, I think the same for Ole Miss to be just, and I don't. It's not to the extent of Alabama and Georgia, but like you said, I think there's just going to be so many Ole Miss fans. And I think we had talked about Ole Miss's schedule to that point, right? Like when we looked at theirs, we said, look, there's a chance Ole Miss could be unbeaten. I think we said kind of. I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, but there's a chance they could be sitting pretty at that point on October 8th, anyway. So. Yeah, it's at Missouri. That's the one you look at, and I think you just have to circle that one because that's where we do the projections of have things just fallen, off for Missouri at that point? Have they just kind of is there those clear identifiable weaknesses that you realize are just not going to be able to be fixed in that season? And what was it? I think kind of in Missouri last year, that was the defense, right? Where you just looked at it
Yeah,
and said, there's
awful.
no way. Yeah, there's no way they're fixing this in one season. So I think those are the things if you're Vanderbilt, you're just looking for improvement because scoreline wise, those three SEC games to start with, it may not be pretty. And I think you just have to find some sort of improvement in there. And that's why we said those first four games are so important because I can't even imagine what your confidence level would be coming into that Alabama game if you're sitting there at 1-3 or something, knowing what you have coming up and kind of squandering the opportunities in those first four games. So.
Well, and it's not even the team's confidence level. It's just injecting some sort of life and
Yeah.
confidence into the program. The fan base is beaten down. Vanderbilt's the butt of every joke. It needs to at least be 2-2 at that point, and if
Yeah.
not 3-1, to have something to suggest brighter days are ahead. Which I think under Clark Lea they're going to get better. But the bowl conversation that's
Yeah.
2024 and beyond, I think. But the last four games on the schedule. The Vanderbilt South Carolina series has been pretty close for the most part, but Carolina has won that one, and they play every year, I think, from 09 on. I don't know what it is about Carolina, but, obviously Carolina's got the better program, but that game has been close enough so many times that you would think just by a coin flip, Vanderbilt would have won one or two of them, but that's not happened. So that one will be in Nashville. Again, South Carolina may have more fans in the building than does Vanderbilt for that one. Then a road trip to Kentucky. And I guess if you're Vanderbilt, again, Missouri is the place where I circle best chance at a win. But Vanderbilt did play South Carolina and Kentucky relatively close to the rest of the schedule compared to the rest of the schedule. I've actually led Carolina with 2 minutes left and then couldn't finish. So, again, I don't think Vanderbilt's going to beat either one of them. But if you're saying a win comes from somewhere, I think it's this 3-game stretch and really probably more like the 2-game stretch from Missouri and South Carolina.
Yeah, I think so. We've talked about I don't think we've done South Carolina's schedule yet, but we have talked about South Carolina throughout the other schedules we have done. And we've said, you take what they did in year one, you know what they're going to have now, potentially quarterback situation now with Rattler there and the possibilities for them offensively and those kind of things. I mean, you would just expect them to continue that ascent, I think. But that's why I look at this game, at least right now, and I'm just thinking, I just feel like South Carolina is going to be further along, certainly because because they're further along at the starting point, and that's why you would just
Yeah.
expect based on the improvement we saw from them last year, you don't necessarily expect them to go in reverse. So even if they're not winning a significantly more games, I think you still expect them just to keep getting better and better. So I think that's going to be a challenge. Maybe from a fan in the stand standpoint, it's not as big as some of these other ones. We talk about the discrepancy for Vanderbilt fans versus opponent fans. That's certainly not going to be the case when you get to the final two games. Against Florida and Tennessee, those are going to be home games for Florida and Tennessee. And see, this is again go back to like why this conversation is different with Vanderbilt is because think about
A
the
home game is
conversation.
not a home game.
Right. And like every other schedule we've talked about, we're like, all right, well, that's important because that's at home. And you're like, okay, well, you give a little bit of a nod this way. Everyone knows at this point. Like it's just home games in SEC play are usually not home games for Vanderbilt. You know, and,
Well,
and that's the issue,
what it
right?
means is you're
So
dealing with 15,000 of other people's fans in the building, or maybe
yeah.
20, rather than 80. So
But think about that. You don't get that advantage because we know that plays a role, right? For even
sure.
the teams at the top level, even the teams that are top 10 teams, Texas A&M is going to get a bump from playing in the atmosphere they play in because there are going to be plays they're going to make throughout the course of that game that are driven by that atmosphere. It's not just the talent. I mean, yes, we know the talent's the big part of it, but we can't undervalue we can't undervalue it. And I think you just kind of look at this, and that's where for Vanderbilt, and this has been the case even when they've been winning games, right? Like even when they've had winning seasons, they've had this issue, and it's I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But that is why when you break down their schedule, we're breaking this down almost in an alternate universe because it's just not the same as breaking down everyone else's schedule, and that's why when we look at this schedule this season, I just don't really see any. I don't see a lot of optimism in SEC play, even if, like we said, maybe Missouri, maybe South Carolina. I don't think they're winning at Kentucky, Florida, Tennessee. I just don't see it. We talked about having Alabama and Georgia on the schedule. It's just tough. So,
Yeah. Well, 6 of the first 10 games in someone else's building, and then the last 2 in theirs, Florida and Tennessee. Florida game was a blowout a year ago. The Tennessee game was, I'm not going to, well, it was depending on your definition of blowout, it was not as lopsided as the Florida game, but Florida with a new coach. And again, I say I would rather play a team with a new coach earlier in the season than late.
yeah.
Vanderbilt does not get that luxury. Tennessee under Josh Heupel had that team clicking on a lot of cylinders at the end of the year. The Vols expected to be a top 20 team this year. Again, that's Vanderbilt's in-state rival. They'll get overrun in their own building by other fans, and again, that's not a game. I'm not saying it couldn't be competitive because you see that with Vandy, Tennessee sometimes when you don't think Vandy's got the horses, but Tennessee is going to be a pretty well coached team and have every advantage coming into that one.
Yeah. Per Phil Steele, Vandy's got the fifth toughest schedule in the country.
And 6 home games, where I think, are they the only team in the conference that's only got 6? I bet they
I
are.
think that's right. And something else I was looking at is when you factor that in, they're number 5 in his toughest schedules, but when you look at all the teams surrounding them, they're all SEC West teams, and so that kind
Yeah.
of shows you, I think, having the built-in of Georgia, the expectation for Tennessee to take a leap, the expectation for Florida to probably be a top 25 team, um, you know, Kentucky, another team I think's right there. So, yeah, I mean, like Auburn's 1, Mississippi State 2, Arkansas 4, Vandy 5, LSU 6, A&M 11, and then it jumps to South Carolina at 17. So, man,
Well,
it's
they
not
they get the Georgia-Alabama double whammy, which Tennessee
right.
also
Yeah.
gets, and I can't remember if anybody else gets that one too.
Well,
Well, there would be 2 teams from the West, obviously. So,
you're looking for optimism. The other thing I was kind of dissecting in Phil Steele's stuff, and we'll talk about this when we do the Vanderbilt preview, but they are 38th in experience in the SEC, and that is third coming in. So
yeah.
try to find some sort of consistency there, maybe. We'll see.
All right. Well, thanks for watching our preview of Vanderbilt's schedule. If we've not done your favorite team, that's coming up this week.
3 to go.
If you've we may have done it already and you
Yes.
just haven't seen it on our channel, which I would encourage you to do. The way you catch all our content is to subscribe. So anyway, thanks for watching. We've got a few more of these to come. We got basketball content on the rise and tons of football content. So stay tuned to us here at the 14 And we're looking forward to bringing you more great content. Again, hit that subscribe button, helps us out. We will see you very soon.